The last person I expected to see standing next to my mother at my father's funeral was my ex-husband. Yet there he was, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist, as if he belonged there. I'm Camilla, and this is how my mother announced her marriage to Dexter, the man who nearly destroyed my life, at my father's funeral. The funeral home buzzed with whispers as mourners filed past my father's casket. I stood greeting them mechanically, my black dress feeling too tight, too restrictive. Trinity, my best friend, hadn't left my side since morning, her steady presence keeping me from completely falling apart. "Your father was a great man," another faceless guest murmured, squeezing my hand. I nodded, the words washing over me like waves I couldn't quite feel anymore. "Camilla." My mother's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "A word, please." I turned to face her, noting how perfectly coiffed her hair was, how precisely applied her makeup remained, despite the tears she'd shed earlier. Dexter stood slightly behind her, and my stomach lurched at the sight of his familiar smirk. "What is he doing here?" I hissed, keeping my voice low to avoid causing a scene. "That's what I need to discuss with you." My mother's perfectly manicured hand reached for Dexter's. "Your father knew about this, and he gave us his blessing before he passed." I felt Trinity's hand tighten on my arm. "Knew about what exactly?" My voice sounded distant, even to my own ears. "Dexter and I were married last month," my mother announced, her chin lifting slightly. "We wanted to wait until after the funeral to tell everyone, but I thought you should know first." The room spun. I grabbed the nearest chair for support, my knuckles white against the dark wood. "You married my ex-husband, the man who—" "The past is the past, darling," my mother cut me off smoothly. "Your father understood that people can change." "Did he understand that Dexter embezzled money from his company?" I shot back, my voice rising despite my best efforts to contain it. "Or did you conveniently forget to mention that part?" Dexter stepped forward, his face a mask of concern that made my skin crawl. "Camilla, I know this is a shock, but don't." I held up my hand. "Don't you dare speak to me." My brother Leonardo appeared at my side, his face twisted with confusion. "What's going on?" "Ask our mother," I spat. "She's full of surprises today." The funeral director approached, his face pinched with worry. "Is everything all right here?" "Everything's fine," my mother assured him, but her eyes were cold when they met mine. "My daughter is just overwhelmed with grief." Trinity pulled me away before I could respond, leading me to a quiet corner of the room. "Breathe, Cam. Just breathe." "She knew," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "She knew what he did to me, to the company, and she married him anyway." "We'll figure this out," Trinity promised, her hand rubbing circles on my back. "But right now, we need to get through this funeral. Your father deserves that much." I nodded, straightening my spine. She was right. This was supposed to be about my father, about honoring his memory. Instead, my mother had turned it into her own twisted announcement party. As I walked back to my position near the casket, I caught sight of Dexter whispering something in my mother's ear, his hand resting possessively on her lower back, the same way he used to touch me before I discovered the truth about his schemes. Leonardo approached me again, his face serious. "Tell me what's really going on, Cam." "Not here," I murmured, watching as another group of mourners approached. "But trust me, Leo, this is worse than you can imagine." The rest of the funeral passed in a blur of handshakes and hollow condolences. I delivered my prepared eulogy on autopilot, speaking about my father's dedication to his business, his family, his legacy. All the while my mother sat in the front row, Dexter by her side, playing the part of the grieving widow perfectly. As the last of the mourners filed out, I felt something shift inside me. The numbness that had carried me through the day began to crack, revealing a white-hot anger underneath. My father might be gone, but I was still here, and I wouldn't let them destroy everything he'd built. Trinity squeezed my hand. "What are you thinking?" I watched my mother and Dexter walk to their car, their heads close together in conversation. I'm thinking it's time for some truths to come out. All of them. Whatever you need, Trinity said firmly. I'm with you. I nodded, my jaw set. They thought they had won, that they could use my father's death to legitimize their betrayal. But they had no idea what was coming. Sometimes karma needs a little help, and I was more than ready to assist. 2 days after the funeral, I found myself standing in my father's office, surrounded by the remnants of his life. The leather chair still held the impression of his body, and his reading glasses lay folded on the desk exactly where he'd left them. I can't believe she's not even here to help, Leonardo said, opening another file cabinet. Too busy with her honeymoon, I guess. I snorted, rifling through a stack of papers. Did you expect anything else from her? I still can't wrap my head around it, he admitted. Dexter? Really? After everything he did to you? Everything he did to the company, I corrected, though the personal betrayal still stung. Which is exactly why we need to find those financial records. Trinity walked in with 3 cups of coffee, setting them on the desk. Remember that time Dexter almost had a heart attack when you accessed his laptop? The memory hit me like a bolt of lightning. That's it, his old laptop. Dad kept everything. I moved to the storage closet, pushing aside boxes until I found what I was looking for. The laptop was outdated now, but my father had insisted on keeping it after Dexter's hasty departure 3 years ago. Will it even turn on? Leonardo asked, peering over my shoulder. One way to find out. I plugged it in and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. Of course, Dad would use his birthday as the password, I muttered, typing in the numbers. The desktop appeared, filled with folders. Trinity leaned in. Look at that one. DT Project Files. My hands shook as I clicked on it. Dozens of documents appeared, including a series of emails between Dexter and an offshore account manager. Holy shit, Leonardo whispered, reading over my shoulder. He was siphoning money from the company's innovation fund, the same fund that was supposed to develop my automated trading algorithm, I said, my voice tight. The one Dad said wasn't profitable enough to pursue. Trinity touched my arm. Cam, look at this email thread. The messages revealed something even worse. My mother had known about the embezzlement for months before I discovered it. She'd helped cover it up, all while watching me struggle to prove my worth to my father. I need some air, I announced, pushing back from the desk, but before I could stand, the office door opened. What are you doing in here? My mother stood in the doorway, Dexter right behind her. Cleaning out Dad's office, I replied coolly. Something you should be helping with instead of playing newlywed. Dexter's eyes locked onto the laptop. Is that your old laptop? Yes. I turned the screen toward them. Want to explain these emails? My mother's face hardened. Those files are company property. You have no right. I have every right. I stood up, anger burning through my veins. I'm on the board now, remember? Dad made sure of that before he died. A decision he clearly made while not thinking clearly, my mother snapped. Like giving his blessing to your marriage? Leonardo interjected. Did he even know, Mom? Really? A flicker of something. Guilt, fear, crossed her face before disappearing. What's done is done. Dexter and I are married, and we both have the company's best interests at heart. Like you had my best interests at heart when you helped him steal my innovation, I demanded. When you watched him take credit for my work. You were never ready for that kind of responsibility, she said dismissively. You're too emotional, too impulsive. That's rich coming from someone who married her daughter's ex-husband. Dexter stepped forward, his face a mask of concern. Camilla, I know you're hurting. Don't, I held up my hand. Don't pretend you care. These emails prove exactly who you are. If you pursue this, my mother warned, you'll destroy everything your father built. No, I corrected her. I'll protect everything he built from people like you. Trinity moved to stand beside me while Leonardo crossed his arms, positioning himself between us and them. Think carefully about your next move, Dexter said, his voice low. Some stones are better left unturned. Is that a threat? I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. It's advice, my mother replied. From someone who loves you. I laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet office. Love? You don't know the meaning of the word. They left shortly after, but their threats hung in the air like smoke. I sat back down at the laptop, my hands steady now as I began copying files. What are you going to do? Leonardo asked. I looked at the email thread, at the evidence of their betrayal laid bare in black and white. I'm going to finish what Dad couldn't. I'm going to clean house. Trinity squeezed my shoulder. Whatever you need, we're here. I nodded, already formulating a plan. They thought they could intimidate me into silence, but they'd forgotten one crucial detail. I was my father's daughter, and I'd learned from the best how to fight dirty when necessary. The company's IT department wasn't hard to access with my board member credentials. At 7 a.m., before most employees arrived, I sat with Marcus, our head of cybersecurity, reviewing years of archived data. These access logs are interesting, Marcus said, pointing to his screen. Someone used your login credentials to access the Innovation Fund database multiple times in 2020, usually between 2 and 4 a.m. That wasn't me. I leaned closer. I was in Singapore during those dates, developing the trading algorithm prototype. Marcus nodded. And look at this IP address. It traces back to Dexter's home network. Trinity, who'd been taking notes, looked up. Can you prove he stole your credentials? Better than that, Marcus typed rapidly. I can prove he used your prototype code to develop what he claimed was his own trading system. The timestamps match perfectly. My phone buzzed. A text from Leonardo. Mum's heading to the office. Heads up. Print everything, I told Marcus, and backup copies to my secure drive. We barely had time to collect the documents before my mother's heels clicked down the hallway. She burst into the IT department, her face flushed with anger. What do you think you're doing? She demanded. I held up my board member ID. My job. Investigating potential security breaches. You're accessing restricted files without authorization. Actually, Marcus interjected, as a board member, Ms. Camilla has full clearance for these files. My mother's eyes narrowed. Marcus, give us the room. Once we were alone, she dropped her polished facade. Stop this witch hunt immediately. Or what? I challenged. You'll marry another one of my exes. You ungrateful child, she hissed. Everything I've done has been to protect this company. By protecting a thief? By helping him steal my work? Your work? She laughed coldly. You mean your father's investment? His resources? His reputation that made it all possible? I spent 2 years developing that algorithm, I shot back. While you and Dexter were busy planning how to steal it, we did what was necessary, she said. The board would never have accepted the innovation from you. You were too young, too inexperienced. So you let Dexter take credit instead? Your daughter's husband? Ex-husband, she corrected. And yes, because he knew how to play the game, unlike you always fighting the system instead of working within it. Trinity stepped forward. The system you're talking about is corrupt. Stay out of this, my mother snapped. This is family business. She is family, I said firmly. More than you've been lately. My mother's face hardened. If you continue this investigation, you'll regret it. The board won't take kindly to these accusations. The board deserves to know the truth. The truth? She moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. The truth is your father knew about everything. He approved it all. The words hit me like a physical blow. You're lying. Am I? She pulled out her phone, showing me an email. He signed off on transferring your project to Dexter. He knew you weren't ready. I stared at the email, my father's signature clear at the bottom. Why? Because he understood what was best for the company, for the family. She touched my arm. Like you need to understand now. I jerked away from her touch. Don't. Think about it, Camilla. If this comes out, it won't just hurt Dexter and me. It'll destroy your father's legacy. Is that what you want? Before I could respond, Leonardo appeared in the doorway. Everything okay here? Perfect, my mother said, smoothing her skirt. Your sister and I were just discussing family loyalty. She left, her perfume lingering in the air like a toxic cloud. I slumped against the desk, the weight of her revelation crushing me. "What did she say?" Trinity asked softly. "My father knew," I whispered. "He helped them steal my work." Leonardo shook his head. "There has to be more to it. Dad wouldn't—" "Wouldn't what? Betray me?" I laughed bitterly. "Apparently that's our family specialty." Marcus cleared his throat from the doorway. "Ms. Camilla, there's something else you should see." He pulled up another set of files on his screen. These were encrypted, but I managed to access them. They're from your father's private server. As I read through the documents, my hands began to shake. There was more to the story, much more. My father had been playing a longer game than any of us realized. "Oh my God," Trinity breathed, reading over my shoulder. I straightened up, new determination flooding through me. "Marcus, I need copies of everything. And I mean everything." "What are you thinking?" Leonardo asked. I looked at the documents, at the truth hidden within them. "I'm thinking it's time to play the game their way. Mom wants to talk about family loyalty? Let's see how she handles family justice." The encrypted files from my father's server painted a different picture than my mother's version of events. I spread them across my dining room table while Trinity and Leonardo helped piece together the timeline. "Look at this," Leonardo pointed to a dated memo. "Dad started documenting Dexter's suspicious activities 2 years ago." Trinity picked up another document. "And these notes about your mother's involvement, he knew she was helping Dexter." "But why let it happen?" I asked, shuffling through more papers. "Why not stop them?" A knock at the door made us all jump. Leonardo checked the security camera feed on his phone. "It's Dexter." "Perfect timing," I muttered, gathering the documents. "Let him in." Dexter strode in like he owned the place, his expensive suit and practiced smile a reminder of everything I'd once fallen for. "Camilla," he said smoothly, "we need to talk." "About how you stole my algorithm? Or about how you married my mother?" His smile didn't waver. "About how you're making a mistake that could hurt everyone involved." "Everyone involved in the theft, you mean?" He sat down uninvited. "Your father understood business. Sometimes the ends justify the means. Is that what you told yourself when you were sleeping with my mother while we were still married?" His facade cracked slightly. "How did you—" "Dad kept records," Leonardo cut in, tossing a dated photo on the table. It showed Dexter and my mother at a hotel, months before our divorce. "Your father was a practical man," Dexter recovered quickly. "He knew the company needed strong leadership." "And you think that's you?" I laughed. "A thief and a fraud?" "I think," he leaned forward, "that you're out of your depth. The board trusts me. They respect me." "They respect what they think you created," Trinity corrected. "What about when they learn the truth?" Dexter's eyes narrowed. "You have no proof." I pulled out my laptop, turning it to face him. "Actually, we do. Dad didn't just document your theft. He documented everything." The colour drained from his face as he watched the video playing on screen. Footage from my father's private office showing Dexter and my mother discussing their plan to steal my work. He was testing us, I realised aloud. All of us. Waiting to see who would prove worthy of his legacy. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Dexter warned, standing up. "Your mother." "My mother chose her side," I cut him off. "Now I'm choosing mine." He moved toward me, but Leonardo stepped between us. "I think it's time for you to leave." "Think about what you're doing, Camilla," Dexter said from the doorway. "Some things can't be undone." After he left, Trinity touched my arm. "Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," I said, pulling out more documents. "Look at this." The paper was dated just weeks before my father's death. A revised company charter giving the board power to remove any executive proven to have engaged in corporate espionage or theft of intellectual property. "Dad knew he was dying," Leonardo said softly. "He was setting up safeguards." "Not just safeguards," I corrected. "Insurance. He made sure the truth would come out one way or another." Trinity studied the charter. "The board meeting is next week. Are you ready for this? Ready to expose my mother and ex-husband's betrayal in front of the entire board?" I picked up my father's final letter, his words of encouragement giving me strength. I've been ready for 3 years. Leonardo's phone buzzed. Mum's calling. Don't answer, I said. Let her wonder, let her worry. What if she tries to destroy the evidence? Trinity asked. She can't, I smiled. Everything's already been sent to the board members' secure emails, set to unlock the morning of the meeting. Dad's final failsafe. He really did think of everything, Leonardo marveled. Almost everything, I said, looking at the photo of Dexter and my mother. He didn't expect his wife to betray him like this. Or maybe he did, Trinity suggested. Maybe that's why he left you the means to expose them. I gathered the documents, my mind already racing ahead to the board meeting. They thought they were so clever playing their games in the shadows, but Dad taught me something they forgot. What's that? Leonardo asked. The truth always comes to light, I said, holding up the damning evidence. And karma? Sometimes it needs a helping hand. We spent the rest of the evening preparing for the board meeting, knowing that in 1 week everything would change. My mother and Dexter thought they'd won, thought they'd secured their position through betrayal and deceit. They were about to learn that my father's legacy wasn't just about business success, it was about justice. And I was my father's daughter, through and through. The day before the board meeting, my mother launched her counterattack. I was reviewing my presentation when Margaret, our head of HR, appeared at my office door. We need to talk, she said, closing the door behind her. Your mother just called an emergency executive committee meeting. I checked my watch. Without notifying all board members? She's trying to push through a motion to suspend your voting rights, Margaret explained, citing emotional instability following your father's death. My phone buzzed. Leonardo was calling. Tell me you've heard, he said when I answered. I'm hearing it now, I replied, putting him on speaker. Where are you? Outside the executive boardroom. Dexter's here with a team of lawyers. Trinity burst into my office waving her tablet. The encrypted emails just went out early. Someone tried to hack the system. That would be Dexter, I said, grabbing my laptop. Margaret, how long until the meeting starts? 20 minutes. They're gathering now? I pulled up the security feed of the boardroom. Sure enough, my mother sat at the head of the table, Dexter by her side, surrounded by men in expensive suits. They're trying to stop tomorrow's meeting before it happens, I realized. Trinity, call Marcus. Make sure the backup servers are secure. Already done, she replied. But Camilla, there's something else. The hack triggered a failsafe in your father's system. What kind of failsafe? She turned her tablet toward me. On the screen, dozens of additional documents were unlocking themselves, flooding the board members' inboxes with evidence of not just the algorithm theft, but years of financial manipulation. Dad really did think of everything, Leonardo said through the speaker. I grabbed my files. Margaret, can you get me into that meeting? She smiled. As head of HR, I'm required to be present for any vote regarding board member status, and I'm allowed to bring counsel. 10 minutes later, I walked into the boardroom with Margaret and Trinity flanking me. The conversations stopped dead. This is a closed meeting, my mother said sharply. Actually, Margaret stepped forward. Company bylaws require HR presence for any vote regarding board member status. Article 7, Section 3. And as the board member in question, I added, I have the right to defend myself. Dexter leaned forward. This isn't necessary, Camilla. We're only trying to help. Help yourselves, you mean? I connected my laptop to the room's display system. Like you helped yourself to my algorithm? That's enough, my mother stood. You're proving our point about your emotional state. Am I? I clicked a button and the screen filled with evidence. Because these documents tell a different story. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. What exactly are we looking at? Proof of intellectual property theft, I said, along with evidence of a long-term conspiracy to defraud the company. These documents weren't meant to be released yet, Dexter said quickly. They're part of a malicious, part of my father's fail-safe system, I corrected, triggered by your attempted hack of the company's servers an hour ago. The room erupted in murmurs as board members checked their phones, finding their inboxes full of damning evidence. This is ridiculous, my mother declared. These documents could be fabricated. Like your marriage license? I projected it onto the screen. Dated 3 months before Dad's death, not after like you claimed. The colour drained from her face. How did you… Dad kept records of everything, I said, including your hotel meetings with Dexter while he was still my husband. One of the board members stood up. I move to postpone this vote pending review of these new documents. Seconded, another called out. My mother's carefully constructed facade began to crack. You have no idea what you're doing. Actually, I do. I played the video of her and Dexter planning the theft. I'm finishing what Dad started. Your father, Dexter began. My father knew everything. I cut him off. He documented everything, and he made sure the truth would come out. The lawyers huddled together, whispering urgently. Board members were already leaving the room, phones pressed to their ears. Tomorrow's board meeting will proceed as scheduled, Margaret announced. All voting rights remain intact. My mother grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. You'll regret this. I pulled free of her grip. No, Mom, you'll regret underestimating me, just like you underestimated Dad. Outside the boardroom, Trinity hugged me tight. That was amazing. It's not over yet, I reminded her. Tomorrow's the real battle. Leonardo joined us, grinning. Did you see their faces when that video played? I checked my phone. More documents were still unlocking, revealing deeper layers of deception. Dad didn't just leave us a way to expose them, I realized. He left us a way to take back everything they stole. Ready for tomorrow? Trinity asked. I watched my mother and Dexter through the boardroom windows, their perfect world crumbling around them. More than ready? It's time for justice. The morning of the board meeting, I found a manila envelope on my doorstep. Inside was a single photograph, my father and me at my college graduation, both of us beaming at the camera. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, "Don't do this to his memory." Another attempt at manipulation, Trinity said, examining the photo over coffee in my kitchen. She's getting desperate. She should be. Leonardo walked in, straightening his tie. The shareholders are already calling for an emergency meeting. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Dexter tried to access the servers again last night. Everything's secure. They're running out of options, I said, gathering my presentation materials, which makes them dangerous. We arrived at the company headquarters an hour early. The lobby was already buzzing with activity, board members and executives arriving in groups, whispering among themselves. Camilla. Dexter appeared beside me as I waited for the elevator. We need to talk, privately. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of everyone at the meeting. Please. His voice cracked slightly. 5 minutes. I nodded to Trinity and Leonardo to go ahead. 5 minutes. Dexter led me to a quiet corner of the lobby. Your mother is devastated. Devastated she got caught, you mean? She loves you, he insisted. Everything she did was to protect the company, your father's legacy. By stealing my work? By marrying my ex-husband? He ran a hand through his hair. It's complicated. Actually, it's very simple. I pulled out my tablet. You stole my algorithm. You and my mother conspired to push me out. And now you're both going to face the consequences. I can make this right, he said quickly. I'll give you credit for the algorithm, full credit. We can say it was a collaborative project. I laughed. You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about credit anymore. Then what do you want? Money? A bigger position in the company? I want justice, I said simply. For me, for my father, for every person you've stepped on to get where you are. His face hardened. Your mother was right. You are too emotional for business. No, I corrected him. I'm just not willing to sacrifice my integrity for it. The elevator dinged, and board members poured out. Among them was my mother, looking perfectly composed, despite everything. Last chance, Dexter warned. Think about what this will do to the family. I am thinking about family, I replied, just not the way you define it. The boardroom was packed when I entered. Trinity had set up my presentation and Leonardo sat ready with the additional documentation. Marcus stood by the tech console, ensuring no last-minute technical difficulties would interrupt us. My mother took her seat at the head of the table. Before we begin, I'd like to address the disturbing allegations that have been circulating. Actually, one of the senior board members interrupted. We'd like to hear from Camilla first. I stood, connecting my tablet to the display. What I'm about to show you isn't just about a stolen algorithm. It's about a pattern of deception that goes back years. This is absurd, my mother protested. We've discussed what you wanted us to hear, another board member cut in. Now we'll hear the full story. For the next hour, I laid out everything. The theft of my work, the financial manipulation, the carefully orchestrated deception. With each revelation, my mother's facade cracked further, while Dexter's smug expression turned to barely concealed panic. The algorithm in question, I pulled up the original code, was developed by me during my time in Singapore. Here's the proof of concept, dated and verified. This is circumstantial, Dexter argued. Anyone could have written this. I entered a command, and the screen filled with my father's private notes. Dad documented everything, including your late-night meetings to plan how to steal my work. My mother stood abruptly. This meeting is over. Actually, Leonardo spoke up, according to company bylaws, it's not. Not until we vote. Vote on what? She demanded. Your removal, I said quietly. Both of you, for corporate espionage and breach of fiduciary duty. The room erupted in discussion. Through it all, my mother stared at me, her expression a mix of fury and something else. Fear. Before we vote, I continued, there's one more thing you should see. I played my father's final video message, recorded days before his death. As his voice filled the room, explaining how he'd discovered their betrayal and set up the failsafes, I watched my mother sink back into her chair, finally understanding the full scope of what she'd lost. The truth was out. Now it was time for justice. My father's face filled the boardroom screen, his voice steady despite his illness. If you're watching this, it means my daughter has discovered what I've known for some time, that my wife and Dexter have betrayed not just her trust, but the trust of this entire company. The room was dead silent. Even the usual typing and whispers had ceased. I've watched them steal my daughter's work, he continued. I've documented their deception, their manipulation, and I've waited, testing their character and testing my daughter's strength. My mother's hands gripped the armrests of her chair, knuckles white. Camilla. My father's eyes seemed to look directly at me. I'm sorry I put you through this, but I needed to know you could fight for what's yours, that you could stand up against those who would take it from you. Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. Trinity squeezed my hand under the table. To the board. My father's tone grew firmer. You'll find complete documentation of everything I've discovered in the files accompanying this video. The choice of how to proceed is yours, but remember, this company was built on innovation and integrity, not theft and deception. The video ended. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Dexter stood up, straightening his jacket. This is clearly a manipulated video. The timestamps and metadata have been verified, Marcus interrupted, by 3 independent experts. This is ridiculous, my mother snapped. You can't possibly believe that you helped steal your daughter's intellectual property. One of the board members, Patricia, leaned forward. Or that you married her ex-husband while conspiring to push her out of the company? Everything I did was for this company, my mother insisted. No, I stood up. Everything you did was for yourself and for him. I nodded toward Dexter, who was already edging toward the door. Sit down, Dexter, Leonardo called out. We're not finished. I think we are, Dexter replied, reaching for the door handle. If you leave this room, Patricia warned, you'll be admitting guilt. All of it. He paused, hand on the door. You have no proof of financial wrongdoing. I clicked to the next slide. Actually, we do. Dad didn't just document the algorithm theft. He tracked every penny you embezzled through offshore accounts. The colour drained from his face as bank statements and transfer records filled the screen. The SEC has already been notified, Leonardo added. They're very interested in speaking with both of you. My mother stood up so quickly her chair toppled backward. You ungrateful child. After everything I've sacrificed. Sacrificed? I cut her off. Like my marriage, my career, my relationship with my father? Your father, she spat, was weak. He couldn't see what needed to be done to keep this company strong. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Patricia cleared her throat. I think we've heard enough. Shall we proceed with the vote? This is a witch hunt, Dexter protested, but his voice shook. No, I corrected him. This is karma. The vote was unanimous. Within minutes, security arrived to escort them from the building. As my mother passed me, she paused. You'll regret this, she hissed. You have no idea what you've done. I know exactly what I've done, I replied. I've taken back what's mine. After they left, Patricia turned to me. The algorithm, can you implement it? I nodded, pulling up the original code. I can have it running within weeks. It's already been tested and proven in Singapore. Then I moved to appoint Camilla as head of innovation and technology, another board member proposed. All in favour? The ayes were unanimous. As the meeting concluded, Trinity hugged me tight. Your father would be so proud. He is proud, Leonardo said, holding up his phone. Look what I found in his personal files. It was a photo I'd never seen before, Dad in his office, watching through the window as I presented my first project to the board. His face glowed with pride. Ms. Camilla, Marcus appeared at my side. The police are here. They'd like to speak with you about pressing charges. I looked at the empty chairs where my mother and Dexter had sat, their abandoned coffee cups still warm. Tell them I'll be right there. Are you okay? Trinity asked softly. I touched the screen where my father's image had been, remembering his words about integrity and strength. I'm better than okay. I'm free. As we left the boardroom, employees lined the hallway, many of them applauding. They'd watched Dexter take credit for others' work for years, seen my mother's manipulation up close. Ready to build something new? Leonardo asked as we walked. I smiled, thinking of all the innovations I'd put on hold, all the ideas I'd been afraid to share. More than ready. It's time to show them what real leadership looks like. The truth had finally come to light, and with it, a new chapter was beginning. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever been silenced by power and greed. The headlines splashed across every business journal. Tech prodigy reclaims stolen algorithm, and mother-son duo face federal charges in corporate espionage case. But I wasn't reading any of them. Instead, I sat in my father's old office, my office now, reviewing applications for our new innovation incubator program. Trinity burst through the door, waving her tablet. They took the plea deal. I looked up from my desk. Both of them. Dexter rolled on your mother first, she said, dropping into a chair. Then she had no choice but to cooperate. Leonardo appeared in the doorway. Just got off the phone with the lawyers. Dexter's facing 5 years, Mom's getting 3, plus they have to repay everything they stole. How much? I asked. 7 million, he grinned. Plus interest. A knock at the door interrupted us. Patricia entered with a young woman I didn't recognize. Camilla, this is Sarah. She's the programmer who tried to report Dexter's theft last year and was fired for it. Sarah stepped forward nervously. I saw what you did, standing up to them. It gave me courage to come forward with others. Others? I asked. 17 so far, Patricia said. All with similar stories of having their work stolen or being silenced. I stood up, walking to my father's old whiteboard where I'd mapped out my original algorithm. Sarah, what was your project? A sustainable energy tracking system, she said, eyes lighting up. It could revolutionize how companies monitor their carbon footprint. I erased the board. Show me. For the next hour, Sarah outlined her project while I took notes. Trinity and Leonardo chimed in with questions, and Patricia watched with approval. This is exactly what the innovation program needs, I said when Sarah finished. Real innovators, supported and credited for their work. Speaking of credit, Trinity handed me a letter. The patent office confirmed it. The algorithm is officially registered in your name. I traced my fingers over my name on the document, remembering all the nights I'd spent developing it, all the times I'd tried to prove its worth. There's something else, Leonardo said softly. We found this in Dad's personal safe. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter dated just days before his death. My dearest Camilla, I read aloud, by now you've discovered the truth and taken back what's yours. I'm sorry for the pain this caused you, but I needed to know you would fight for what's right, not just what's easy. My voice caught, but I continued. You were never the weak one. You were always the strongest of us all. Your mother and Dexter saw only power, but you saw possibility. That's why you'll succeed where they failed. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. Patricia squeezed my shoulder. The company is changing, I said, looking up from the letter. Starting today, we protect innovators, not exploit them. The board approved your full proposal, Patricia confirmed. The innovation incubator, the mentorship program, everything. And the first project? Trinity asked with a knowing smile. I turned to Sarah. How would you like to head up our sustainable energy division? Her eyes widened. Really? Really? I nodded. With full credit and patent rights for your work. As Sarah hugged me, tears flowing freely now, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother's number. You think you've won, but you'll never be me. I showed it to Leonardo. He shook his head. She still doesn't get it. No, I replied to the text. I'll be better. I blocked her number and turned back to the whiteboard. Sarah, let's hear more about this energy tracking system. I have some ideas for expansion. As we worked, I caught sight of my reflection in the office window, standing exactly where my father used to stand, leading with integrity just as he'd hoped I would. Trinity nudged me. You okay? I looked around the room, at Sarah sketching excitedly on the board, at Leonardo and Patricia discussing implementation plans, at the pile of applications from other innovators seeking a chance to be heard. You know what? I smiled. For the first time in years, I really am. The sun set over the city skyline, casting long shadows through the office windows. But unlike the shadows of deceit that had darkened these halls before, these shadows held promise of innovation, of integrity, of justice served and wrongs made right. My father had given me the tools to fight back, but the strength to use them? That had been mine all along, and now, finally, everyone knew it. Let's get to work, I said, picking up a marker. We've got a company to rebuild.